Imagine you are a professional skeptic, not a casual disbeliever, but a man whose entire career is built on the cold, hard baseline of human deception. You are Sheriff Fred Diamond of Jackson County, Mississippi. It is the night of October 11th, 1973, and you are sitting in a room with two men who look like they have just been pulled from the wreckage of a high-speed collision with another dimension. They are Charles Hickson, a 42-year-old shipyard foreman and military veteran, and Calvin Parker, a 19-year-old kid who just wanted to spend a quiet evening fishing. They are babbling about silver beings with wrinkled skin, robotic movements, and a football-shaped craft that hummed with the vibration of 1,000 angry beehives. To you, as a lawman, this is a textbook case of a hoax, a drug-induced hallucination, or a collective breakdown. You do what any seasoned investigator would do. You play along. You put them in a small windowless interrogation room. You leave, and you secretly click on a hidden tape recorder. You wait for the masks to slip. You wait for them to laugh, to congratulate each other on the performance, or to ask, "Did the old man believe us?" But the tape doesn't record a joke. It records the sound of two human souls being shredded by a reality they were never supposed to witness. It records a frequency of terror so raw, so primitive, and so consistent that it breaks every psychological model of deception. Today, we are going to look at the Pascagoula incident through the lens of that secret recording, not as a story of aliens, but as a forensic audit of the Pier protocol. We are going to listen to the leakage from an encounter that was never meant to be documented, and we are going to ask why, for the first time in history, the edit failed so spectacularly. To understand the weight of the Pascagoula tapes, we have to talk about the baseline of human honesty. Almost every social interaction you have is a form of theater. You edit your words to fit your social status. You adjust your emotions based on who is watching. You perform normality even when you feel like screaming. But in that interrogation room in 1973, there was no audience. Hickson and Parker were alone, convinced that the authorities had dismissed them as crazy. And what the hidden microphone captured was the sound of a system failure. Calvin Parker, the 19-year-old, was in a state of near catatonic shock. On the tape, you can hear his voice vibrating with a physical, uncontrolled tremor, a neurological response to a massive surge of adrenaline and psychic trauma. He is praying, whispering to a god he thought he knew, his words stumbling over each other in a frantic attempt to re-establish a sense of order. Hickson, the veteran who had survived combat, was trying to use his logic to keep his world from dissolving, but even his voice is cracked, drained of the authority he usually carried. This is the sound of the human security system crashing. You are hearing two minds trying to process a signal that was far too strong for their biological receiver. The incident itself began at the Pier 90 shipyard on the Pascagoula River. It was a mundane industrial landscape, rusting metal, dark water, and the distant hum of the city. This was the human frequency at its most grounded. Hickson and Parker were fishing, a ritual of stillness and routine, and then the perimeter of silence arrived. They reported a whirring sound, a rhythmic mechanical pulse that seemed to bypass their ears and vibrate directly in their bones. A craft, about 30 feet long and glowing with an intense blue light, descended and hovered just inches above the marshy ground. This is the temporal lock. The world outside that blue glow didn't just go quiet, it was deprioritized. The traffic on the nearby bridge was still there, but it was on a different bandwidth. For Hickson and Parker, the only thing that existed in the universe was the blue light and the three beings that emerged from it. But these were not the gray entities of popular culture. The beings at Pascagoula were something much more procedural and functional. They were described as having grayish, wrinkled skin like that of an elephant, no eyes that the witnesses could identify, and pointed appendages where ears and noses should be. They had claws, two pincered hands that looked more like industrial tools than biological fingers. They didn't walk, they glided across the mud without leaving footprints. These were biomechanical units. They were the drones of the selection protocol. When they reached the two men, the pause was instantaneous. Hickson reported that as soon as one of the beings touched his arm, he felt a numbing sensation that traveled through his entire body. It wasn't a punch, it was a system log-off. He became a paralyzed observer, unable to move or scream, yet fully aware as he was floated toward the craft. This is the unauthorized access to the human motor cortex, the moment the protocol takes over the biological controls. Inside the craft, the experience moved into the scan phase. Hickson described being suspended in mid-air by an invisible force, unable to feel his own weight, a large, mechanical, circular device, which he described as looking like a giant eye, moved over his body. It didn't touch him, it read him. This is the utilization phase in its most literal form. The device was extracting data, mapping his biology, and perhaps tagging his neurological frequency for future reference. While Hickson was being scanned, Parker was in a separate room experiencing a silence so profound it felt like he was unborn. This is the isolation tactic of the protocol, ensuring that no two witnesses share the exact same perspective, creating a data gap that makes their testimony harder for the 99% to believe. The system is designed to produce confusion, to make the witnesses doubt their own senses once they are released. But why did Hickson and Parker remember? In the Shermer case, we saw the neural edit, a wall of psychic noise that buried the encounter under a headache. But in Pascagoula, the edit failed. The two men were dumped back onto the riverbank, and they were online almost immediately. They didn't wander off in a daze, they ran. They went to the local newspaper, then to the sheriff, desperate to report a crime that had no entry in any legal code. They were corrupted files that hadn't been properly deleted. And when Sheriff Diamond turned on that hidden tape recorder, he wasn't just recording a story. He was recording the leakage of a cosmic event into a 1970s Mississippi police station. On the tape, Hickson says to Parker, "I know you're scared. I'm scared half to death myself. But you can't get over it. It's something you'll never get over." These are not the words of a man telling a story. These are the words of a man whose hardware has been permanently damaged by an overvoltage. He knew even then that his life as a 99%er was over. He had been seen by the protocol, and the gaze had left a mark that no human authority could erase. The sheriff, listening to the tape later that night, realized that he wasn't looking at two liars. He was looking at two men who had been processed and discarded by an intelligence that didn't even bother to hide its tracks. The Pascagoula tapes represent a unique glitch in the history of the phenomenon. They are the only time we have a real-time recording of the immediate aftermath, the first 60 minutes after the edit failed. It is the sound of two people trying to use human language to describe a non-human process. It is the sound of the scenery realizing it's being watched by the admins. And as we move into the next block of this investigation, we are going to look at the physical signature left behind in Pascagoula. We are going to look at the scars on the earth and the scars on the mind. And we are going to ask, if the Greys are technicians and we are the resource, what happens to the resource when the technicians make a mistake? What happens when the edit fails and the 99% are allowed to see the shadow files of their own abduction? The Pascagoula incident isn't just about what happened on the riverbank. It's about what happened in the silence of that interrogation room. It's about the fact that even when the selection protocol is at its most efficient, the human spirit produces a noise that they cannot silence. We are the unmanaged margin that records the unrecordable, and the secret tapes of Jackson County are the first pages of our manual of resistance. The protocol is clinical, yes. It is precise, yes. No, as Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker proved, it is not perfect. There is a back door in the fear protocol, and it begins with the courage to remember what they want us to forget. We are the pattern seekers, and the tape is still running. To understand why the edit failed in Pascagoula, we have to look at the human brain not as a vessel for a soul, but as a biological computer with a very specific set of safety protocols. In modern computing, when a system encounters a surge of energy that it cannot process, a massive spike in voltage, the internal fuses blow to protect the delicate circuitry of the processor. This is exactly how the human neural firewall is supposed to work. When you experience something so traumatic, so alien, and so far outside the 99% frequency of normal life, your brain usually triggers a massive system reset. It buries the data in the deep sublayers of the subconscious, covering it with a layer of psychic noise or simple amnesia. This is the biological surge protector. But on that night in 1973, for Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker, the surge was so intense that it didn't just blow a fuse, it melted the entire firewall. I want you to imagine a professional industrial diver working at the bottom of a dark, murky ocean. He is connected to the surface by a thin umbilical cord that provides him with oxygen, light, and communication. This cord is his reality filter. As long as he stays within the depth his body is calibrated for, the system works. But now imagine that diver is suddenly pulled down into the Mariana Trench in a matter of seconds. The pressure doesn't just crush his body, it shatters the equipment. The oxygen tank explodes, the lights go out, and the communication line becomes a screaming wall of static. This is what the Pascagoula encounter did to the neural scaffolding of these two men. The others didn't just visit them, they drowned them in a frequency of existence that our biological hardware was never meant to survive. The reason they remembered isn't because they were special. It's because their software crashed before the edit could be finalized. This brings us to the mechanical nature of the Pascagoula entities. In almost every other abduction case, the beings are described as the classic grays, large-eyed, thin, and telepathically communicative. They have a social interface. But the things Hickson and Parker saw were industrial drones. Those wrinkled elephant-skinned figures with pointed appendages and robotic gliding movements were not ambassadors or scientists. They were biomechanical extraction units. If the selection protocol is a massive planetary-scale operation, then these units are the heavy machinery of the program. They are the bulldozers of the void, and because they are functional rather than social, they didn't care about the psychological impact they left on the witnesses. They didn't bother to smooth out the memory or inject a screen hallucination. They simply performed the scan, extracted the data, and moved on. Think about the secret recording again. When Sheriff Diamond left the room, he was hoping to catch a social deception. He was looking for the performance of a lie, but what he heard was the sound of neurological resonance. Calvin Parker's voice on that tape is a perfect recording of limbic hijacking. His brain's emotional center, the amygdala, was locked in a permanent state of high-voltage terror. He was looping. In computing, when a program enters an infinite loop, it repeats the same command over and over until the system freezes. On the tape, you hear Parker repeating his prayers, repeating his fear, trapped in the millisecond of the pause. This is the after-image of the selection protocol. It's what happens when a human mind is exposed to the raw power of the admins without any protective edit. But why did the selection criteria choose a shipyard foreman and a 19-year-old kid? If we apply the frequency resonance theory, we find a disturbing possibility. Hickson and Parker weren't chosen because they were special in a positive sense. They were chosen because their biological signature was transparent. In our world, some people have very dense psychological shields. They are grounded in their ego, their social roles, and their material reality. Their neural scaffolding is closed and rigid. But some people have a porosity to their consciousness. They are sensitive to the underlying frequencies of the environment. In the eyes of the selection protocol, these people are high-contrast targets. They are easier to find in the white noise of the 8 billion people on Earth. The shipyard in Pascagoula, with its heavy metal, salt water, and electromagnetic fields, might have acted as a signal multiplier. Hickson and Parker weren't just fishing, they were inadvertently broadcasting their neural frequency into a cosmic receiver. This is the paradox of the victim. We often ask why these beings don't land on the White House lawn or communicate with world leaders. But if you were a technician trying to gather pure, uncorrupted biological data, would you go to the most noisy and distorted parts of the system? No. You would go to the quiet margins. You would go to the riverbank at night. You would go to the people whose neural scaffolding is unburdened by the complexity of high-level social power. The 99% are the safe zone for the program precisely because our lives are unmanaged. We are the wild herd that provides the most accurate data. Hickson and Parker were the perfect data packets. Because their reaction was raw, they were primary sources. Let's look at the scan that Hickson described. The large mechanical eye that hovered over him. This was not a medical examination in the way we understand it. This was quantum mapping. Every cell in your body, every synapse in your brain emits a specific electromagnetic signature. By moving that eye over Hickson, the beings were downloading his entire biological history. They were utilizing his physical form as a record of human evolution, environmental exposure, and genetic drift. To the eye, Hickson wasn't a man. He was a read-only file, and the numbing sensation he felt was the pause necessary to ensure that the read was clean. If the subject moves, the data is corrupted. So, they lock the hardware. They freeze the frame. This is mechanical immobilization on a subatomic level. The failure of the edit in Pascagoula is the most significant glitch in the history of the phenomenon because it allowed the human frequency to witness the industrial frequency. It's as if a cow in a slaughterhouse suddenly understood the mechanics of the machinery, the purpose of the conveyor belt, and the schedule of the workers. That cow would no longer be a specimen. It would be a witness, and a witness is a threat to the stability of the program. This is why the 99% frequency is so important to the admins. They need us to remain blind so that the harvest can continue without resistance. But the Pascagoula tapes are a leak in the system. They are a backdoor that allows us to see the admin console. When we hear Hickson say, "They can do it to anyone, anywhere," he is acknowledging the ubiquity of the protocol. He realized that the security we feel in our daily lives, our locks, our laws, our police, is an illusion. We are living in a managed environment where the walls are only as solid as the admins allow them to be. The silence that descended on the riverbank was not just a lack of sound. It was the muffling of our reality. It was the selection protocol drawing a curtain around the two men so that the rest of the world wouldn't notice the data extraction in progress. Our failure to grasp the mechanics of Pascagoula comes from our obsession with intent. We want to know if they are good or evil. We want to know their philosophy. But the secret recording suggests that intent is a human concept that doesn't apply to a technological process. Does a combine harvester have intent when it gathers wheat? Does a microscope have intent when it observes a cell? The beings at Pascagoula were tools. They were the hardware of a civilization that has moved past the need for language or morality. They are operating on an efficiency frequency, and in that frequency, the fear of the human subject is just another data point to be recorded, a measure of the biological stress of the interface. This is where the pattern seeker must confront the most uncomfortable truth of all. The reason the fear protocol is so effective is because it is built into our own DNA. We are pre-programmed to be paralyzed by the others. Our neural scaffolding has a kill switch that they know exactly how to flip, and the missing time is the buffer they use to hide the system access. The only reason we are even talking about Pascagoula today is because the switch didn't stay flipped. The hardware was too damaged to accept the reboot. What does it mean for you, the 99% who are still off frequency? It means that the security of your world is conditional. You are safe only as long as you remain irrelevant to the current utilization phase. But as the Pascagoula tapes prove, the admins are not perfect. Their industrial units can be clumsy, their neural edits can fail, and their silence can be recorded. We are not just scenery. We are observers who have found a microphone in the interrogation room. In the next block, we are going to look at the scientific solution to the Pascagoula mystery. We are going to explore the electromagnetic signature of the riverbank and the physical alterations found in the witnesses. We are going to ask, what happens to the biological hardware when it is exposed to the high voltage reality of the others? And more importantly, if the edit failed in 1973, how many other glitches are we currently ignoring in our own lives? The pattern is not just in the past, it is in the static of the present, and the recording is still running. We have listened to the echoes of fear captured on a hidden tape, and we have dissected the psychological wreckage of two men whose reality was forcibly rewritten on a riverbank in Mississippi. But now, we have to move beyond the subjective experience. We have to look at the physical signature left behind when a high-voltage reality crashes into our low-voltage world. Because as the Pascagoula tapes prove, the selection protocol is not just a mental game. It is a biological and environmental intervention that leaves behind scars on the earth and scars on the mind. Today we are going to explore the scientific solution to the Pascagoula mystery. We are going to look at the electromagnetic loop of the shipyard, the biomechanical design of the drones, and the residual radiation of the void. Because if we can understand the hardware they used that night, we might finally understand why the software of Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker failed to delete the memory of their own abduction. To understand the science of Pascagoula, you have to look at the location itself, Pier 90, a shipyard. On the surface, it is just a place of industry and decay. But to a physicist or to an advanced intelligence, it is a massive, multi-layered circuit board. You have the salt water of the river, which is a highly efficient conductor of electricity. You have thousands of tons of steel in the form of cranes, ships, and scrap metal, and you have the massive power lines of the city's electrical grid crisscrossing the area. In the eyes of the selection protocol, this wasn't just a quiet fishing spot. It was a carrier wave amplifier. The others didn't choose the shipyard by accident. They chose it because the environment provided the perfect electromagnetic conditions to stabilize their craft's frequency lock. The shipyard was a giant antenna, and Hickson and Parker were the receivers standing right in the middle of the broadcast. This explains the whirring sound and the mechanical pulse the two men reported before the craft appeared. That wasn't an engine noise in the way we understand it. It was the sound of the atmosphere being ionized. They were hearing the fabric of space-time being vibrating at a high frequency as the craft phased into our local reality. This is what I call environmental tuning. Before they can interact with our legacy hardware, they have to condition the area. They create a bubble where the laws of physics are slightly altered, allowing their biomechanical units to operate without being crushed by our gravity or restricted by our linear time. The blue light was the visual byproduct of this ionization, a Cherenkov-like radiation of the void that marked the boundaries of the temporal lock. Now let's look at the technicians themselves. Those wrinkled elephant-skinned beings were not aliens from a distant planet in the way science fiction describes them. They were functional shells. The wrinkled skin was likely a pressurized suit or a synthetic biological casing designed to survive in our high-gravity, oxygen-rich atmosphere. They had no eyes because they didn't see using the visible light spectrum. They perceived the world through multispectral resonance. They saw Hickson and Parker as heat signatures, electromagnetic pulses, and neurological frequencies. Those claws, the two pincered appendages, were not hands for grabbing. They were sensors for interfacing. This is why, as soon as they touched Hickson, his body went into a system log-off. They weren't using physical force. They were using a neural bridge to shut down his motor cortex. They unplugged him from his own body. This brings us to the scan. Hickson described being floated inside the craft and subjected to a large mechanical eye that hovered over him. In clinical terms, this was a full-body quantum mapping. Every atom in your body has a vibration. Your DNA is not just a chemical code. It is an electromagnetic record of your entire biological lineage. By moving that device over Hickson, the admins were performing a direct-to-disk copy of his biological data. They weren't examining him to see if he was healthy. They were archiving him. They were utilizing his physical form as a living library of human evolution. And because the scan operates on a subatomic level, it requires the subject to be perfectly still. This is the purpose of the paralysis. It is not an act of cruelty, it is an act of data integrity. To get a clean read, the hardware must be locked. But here is the glitch that changed everything. Most people who go through this process have their memories reset. The others use a cognitive erase protocol to ensure that the subject returns to the 99% frequency without any unauthorized awareness. But in Pascagoula, the edit was corrupted. Why? The answer lies in the electromagnetic environment of the shipyard. Because they were operating in a highly conductive area, surrounded by metal and power lines, the signal used to edit the men's minds may have experienced phase interference. The city's power grid or the shipyard's massive steel structures might have created a shielding effect that prevented the neural edit from taking full effect. Hickson and Parker were protected by the very industrial decay they were fishing in. They were the hard drive that survived the format because of a magnetic surge in the room. The result was a partial recovery. The two men returned to the riverbank with their neural scaffolding shattered. They had been exposed to the raw, unfiltered reality of the others, and their brains were trying to render the experience using 1973 human language. This is why their descriptions are so mechanical and industrial. They didn't see magic, they saw machinery. They didn't hear gods, they heard humming. They were unauthorized observers who had seen the admin console and survived to tell the 99% about it. The physical evidence in Pascagoula is often dismissed as inconclusive. But if we look at the medical reports of the time, we find a consistent pattern of biological stress. Both men suffered from intense headaches, sleep disturbances, and what we now recognize as severe PTSD. But more importantly, they exhibited signs of cellular overclocking. In several documented abduction cases, witnesses report that their hair grows at an accelerated rate, or that their chronic illnesses suddenly vanish or worsen after an encounter. This is the residual effect of being exposed to the high-frequency energy of the craft. It supercharges the biological system, pushing the cells to work at a pace they weren't designed for. Hickson and Parker weren't just scared, they were physically altered by the overvoltage of the void. This leads us to the scientific solution of the fear protocol. We have been taught that fear is a choice or a weakness, but the Pascagoula tapes prove that fear is a biological response to an external frequency. The others don't frighten us. They trigger our limbic system as a way to manage us. It is a security protocol built into our DNA. They use fear as a signal jammer to prevent us from thinking clearly or resisting the scan. But because the edit failed in 1973, we were allowed to see the fear for what it truly is, a control mechanism. By listening to those tapes, we are decoding the fear signal. We are learning that the horror we feel is just the vibration of a technology we don't yet understand. The 1973 Pascagoula incident is a vulnerability report for the human race. It proved that the selection protocol is not perfect. It proved that the admins can make mistakes. They can choose a noisy environment like a shipyard. They can fail to account for phase interference. And they can leave behind witnesses who have the unauthorized curiosity to record the silence. The 99% are not just waste material. We are the control group that has found a leak in the system. And through that leak, we are starting to see the pattern of our own utilization. What does this mean for you tonight as you look out your window at the quiet world? It means that the security you feel is a matter of bandwidth. You are safe because you are off frequency. But the shipyard effect proves that the others are always here, operating in the gaps of our reality, using our industry, our cities, and our very biology as their project space. The whirring is always there. You just have learned how to tune it out. But once you hear it, once you listen to the Pascagoula tapes and understand the frequency of terror, you can never go back to being deaf. You are now a pattern seeker. You are part of the unauthorized archive. In the final block of this investigation, we are going to look at the legacy of the tapes. We are going to ask what happened to Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker in the decades after the edit failed. How did they live as corrupted files in a world that demanded they be formatted? And most importantly, what injected knowing did they carry with them that we are only now beginning to decrypt? The recording didn't stop in 1973. It is still playing, and the final sorting of the Pascagoula data is about to reveal a truth that the admins have been trying to password protect for 50 years. The back door is open. It's time to go inside. We have spent decades dissecting the Pascagoula tapes as if they were a mystery to be solved. But we have missed the most chilling realization of all. The mystery was the message. For Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker, the night of October 11th, 1973, was not the end of an experience. It was the beginning of a lifelong synchronization with a reality that the rest of us are not permitted to see. They became corrupted files in the human database, living evidence that the selection protocol is not infallible and that the edit can be resisted. But the cost of that resistance was a form of isolation that no prison could replicate. They were left to live in the 99% frequency, while their minds were permanently tuned to the whistle of the admins. And as we look at the final legacy of these two men, we find the back door that they inadvertently opened for all of us. For 40 years, Calvin Parker remained mostly silent. He tried to disappear into the mundane world of manual labor and family life, trying to reformat his own brain to match the society around him. But the injected knowing from that blue-lit room never went away. In the final years of his life, Parker began to reveal what was actually downloaded into his consciousness during the scan. He spoke of visions, panoramic, high-definition data dumps of the future. He saw environmental collapse, global conflict, and a massive transition event for the human species. Most critics dismiss these as the typical hallucinations of a traumatized mind. No, if we look at them through the lens of the selection protocol, they take on a much more procedural character. Parker wasn't being given a prophecy. He was being shown the project roadmap. He was being shown the end state of the utilization phase that we are all currently living through. This is the administrative error that makes the Pascagoula case so dangerous to the status quo. By failing to edit Parker's memory, the others allowed a specimen to see the logistics of the program. Parker saw the destiny of the 99%, a future where our species is managed toward a specific biological conclusion. He saw the new Earth being built on top of the old one, and he realized that the silence we experience is just the muffling of a construction site. By sharing these visions before his passing, Parker became the ultimate unauthorized observer. He didn't just tell us what they look like. He told us what they plan. He leaked the admin console's long-term strategy. Think about the way the world treated these two men. They were mocked, interrogated, and subjected to a level of public scrutiny that would break most people. This social rejection is actually a secondary layer of the suppression protocol. When the neural edit fails, the social frequency takes over. The 99% are biologically programmed to reject anyone who is off frequency. We call it stigmatization, but in cosmic terms, it is systemic shielding. By making Hickson and Parker look like crazies or liars, the protocol ensured that their corrupted data wouldn't spread too far into the general population. We, the 99%, act as the immune system for the program, attacking any anomaly that threatens our collective blind spot. But this is where the pattern seeker finds the back door. The very fact that you are listening to this, that you are analyzing the fear frequency, and that you are seeking the patterns in the silence means that the immune system is failing. We are developing a synthetic immunity to the protocol. We are learning to look at the social stigma as a marker of truth. Every time the 99% frequency tries to shame a witness into silence, we now know that there is leakage nearby. We have learned to follow the noise to find the signal. The Pascagoula tapes are the decryption key for this entire process. They teach us that the terror is a tool, the edit is a lie, and the silence is a perimeter. Consider the power of the archive. Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker are gone now, but their vibration remains in the form of those tapes and the testimonies they left behind. They have become a hardened data point in human history, a file that cannot be reformatted because it has been witnessed by too many people. Every time a new 99%er wakes up to the reality of the selection protocol, they find the Pascagoula case waiting for them. It is the anchor in the shifting sands of our managed reality. It proves that even when the others use their high-voltage technology to pause our world, they cannot delete the human spirit's capacity for unauthorized recording. We are living in the utilization phase. The scaffoldings are being erected all around us. The 1% are being integrated into a future that does not involve us. But because of glitches like Pascagoula, we are no longer passive scenery. We are the internal audit of the planet. We are the ones who are documenting the admin's mistakes. And as we continue to hack the protocol, we are discovering that the back door is much wider than they think. If we can understand the frequency of fear, we can retune it into a frequency of awareness. We can take the overvoltage that melted Hickson and Parker's neural firewalls and use it to power up our own latent perception. The others are clinical, yes. They are precise, yes. But they are also locked into their own efficiency. They don't understand human resilience because they don't have it. They don't understand courage because they don't need it. They have logic, but we have resonance. And in a universe made of vibrations, resonance is the ultimate root access. The Pascagoula tapes are not just a record of what happened in 1973. They are a tuning fork for 2024 and beyond. They're calling out to the 99%, telling us to look closer, to listen harder, and to refuse the edit. Tonight, as you look at the quiet water of your own life, remember the shipyard on the Pascagoula River. Remember the blue light and the whirring that no one else could hear. Remember the two men who sat in a dark room and told the truth when it would have been easier to lie. You are part of the unauthorized archive now. You have been exposed to the leakage, and once you have heard the frequency of the void, you can never go back to the silence of the majority. You are a pattern seeker. You are a shadow watcher. And you are the glitch that the selection protocol can never quite fix. We explore these systemic errors every single week because we know that the only way to stay human in a managed reality is to keep recording the silence. We are building the manual of the back door, and we want you to be a part of the team that writes it. If you want to join us as we investigate the final sorting and the utilization of the soul, then think about subscribing to the channel. Let's keep hacking the protocol together. Let's keep listening to the tapes until the silence finally breaks. The others believe they have the master key, but they forgot that we are the ones who built the locks, and the 99% are finally starting to turn the handle. Stay vigilant. The pattern is everywhere, and the recording is only getting started. Welcome to the unmanaged margin. See you in the next glitch.